Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Social Justice, Our History and Future. A note for attendees that the communication platform to be used to communicate important information throughout the World Affairs Conference today is the WAC page on Instagram at World Affairs Con. So before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you should know how to participate in today's event. You've joined the presentation listening on your computer's speaker system by default and you are muted. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions panel of the control panel. You may send your questions at any time during the presentation and we will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded and you will receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view the recording. I would now like to introduce Ajani Charles. So Ajani is a mindfulness expert, a self-actualization enthusiast, and a photographer. So we'll be starting off today with a quick meditation.
Hi, thanks for having me. The society that we live in can be very brutal and challenging in many ways. It can promote harshness in certain capacities, and loving kindness meditation is the antithesis to that. The loving kindness meditation, which stems from the Buddhist tradition, is a meditation that helps us to cultivate feelings of warmth and friendliness for ourselves and others. So I think that it's a good way to start our day. So to engage in a loving kindness meditation, sit in a comfortable position with your shoulders back, close your eyes, take a deep breath, allow your stomach to expand, and now revert back to your natural breath. And I want you to notice the sensation of your breath going in and out of your nostrils, simply noticing. Now I want you to recall when you experienced unconditional love, when you felt completely safe and absolutely grounded. And I want you to imagine these feelings of loving kindness emanating from your chest, from your heart, and covering your entire body. Now I want you to imagine someone that you love or someone that you respect greatly. And I want you to imagine projecting the loving kindness from yourself onto that individual, covering their body with love, kindness, and empathy. Now I want you to imagine someone that is neutral to you. It could be a neighbor. It could be an employee at your local grocery store. It could be someone that you drive past every day that you don't know very well. And I want you to imagine projecting loving kindness onto that individual. Now I want you to imagine someone that may have harmed you in the past, someone that you may resent, someone that causes you to feel anger. And to the degree that you can, even if it's a small degree, I want you to project loving kindness from yourself onto that individual. And I want you to envision everyone at the World Affairs Conference watching this amazing event from the comfort of their homes. And I want you to imagine loving kindness emanating from you, from your chest, from your heart, and projecting outwards onto all of them. Finally, I want you to imagine loving kindness emanating from you outward into the world, throughout your community, to all beings, human or otherwise. And I want you to imagine loving kindness reaching all of them in this moment. Now take one last deep breath and let it go. And slowly open your eyes. How was that?
Thank you, Ajani. I'm certainly feeling the love. And if everyone decided to treat those they resent with love and kindness, the world would be such a better place. And so that's going to take us straight into our conversation today. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us, and we're so excited to have you. To start off, you grew up in Toronto and you've been taking photographs since you were very young. So how did your upbringing inspire you artistically, intellectually, in the scape of mindfulness, anything of the sort?
Yeah, my upbringing had a huge positive influence on me and inspired me to pursue an artistic path professionally and otherwise. My father, he's a retired professor of English literature and of African studies, and my mother's a psychiatric nurse. They've always been supportive of my artistic predispositions. My family comes from Haiti, and on this side of the world, in the Western world, Haiti has the highest number of artists per capita. Um, my parents, they had me audition for the Claude Watson School for the Arts at the age of 9. So I became immersed in the arts at a very young age. And being immersed in the arts and studying the arts formally and in my own time uh, allowed me to build a lot of confidence to pursue an artistic path professionally. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, so important how a supportive family can really just kickstart you into a great life and career. So, speaking of that, how do your life influence your artistic style?
I truly believe that everything that we do as individuals is a byproduct of our upbringing, our genetics, our social conditioning, the media that we consume. So all of my life experiences have influenced my artistic practices, my career, and I've traveled the world. I've interacted with countless people, and I've been in all types of situations, both fulfilling and shocking and painful. And all of those have inspired me in various ways. And I've imbued those experiences into my artwork, into my career path, and they inform everything that I do professionally and otherwise.
Yeah. So you and Julian Kristen Lutz, professionally known as Director X, you collaborate a lot on Operation Prefrontal Cortex. How has mentorship impacted you?
Mentorship is huge. I strongly suggest that all high school students, all young people seek out mentors. Um, I've been watching Julian's music videos since I was 14 years old, and I've always been inspired by his work um, in the arts, entertainment, and hip hop worlds. And when I first began my career, I was a production assistant at 235 Films, which at the time was the most prominent music video production company in Canada. So Julian was working with them, and I was an intern for the company. So that was my first experience with working with him. After that, I wanted to work with him further, but there wasn't really a good fit. Eventually, he started Operation Prefrontal Cortex. And at the same time, I had experienced an existential crisis that allowed me to find meditation, other mindfulness practices, different forms of yoga So it became a perfect fit. It was very serendipitous that I would become the art director for Operation Prefrontal Cortex. For those of you in the audience who aren't aware of what Operation Prefrontal Cortex is, what we are is a mindfulness and meditation organization and program designed to reduce gun violence, mass violence, and police violence in Toronto. How Operation Prefrontal Cortex came about is Julian was hosting his own New Year's Eve party in a pretty affluent area of Toronto, and someone was shot at the party, and the bullet went through that person and hit Julian in the back at his own party, a suit and tie party. So fortunately, he wasn't terminally injured, and he was able to walk away from that situation. And after he finished processing the trauma of being shot, he started thinking to himself, what would compel someone to show up at a party with a gun and to fire it? And he learned that it comes down to brain chemistry, the structures of the brain, and how childhood trauma and abuse and neglect change the human brain. And what he learned was that in individuals that experience childhood trauma that's unprocessed, the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that's in charge of executive functioning, planning, rational interactions like this one, it starts to shrink. And the amygdala, which is the fight, flight, freeze part of the brain, starts to grow. And the human brain becomes over reliant on the amygdala and becomes less reliant on the prefrontal cortex. That's why when people who have experienced childhood trauma, they tend to snap. They don't have any patience. They seem to lack in foresight. So when you have someone like that who's armed with a gun in a public space and they're involved in a social interaction that triggers them, that reminds them of their childhood trauma, they're prone to lashing out violently.
That is so fascinating how Julian took that traumatizing experience and turned it into something that could change so much. And it's so cool that you've decided to become a part of it. So you touched on this earlier, but if you want to go into depth, how does Project Prefrontal Cortex approach racial justice and social justice, and what are they doing to drive change?
Right. In Toronto, the gun violence has been increasing for approximately the last 6 years. In 2020, there was a small 6% drop in gun violence, which is not sufficient at all. Many of the incidences of gun violence in Toronto involve young Black males and other marginalized groups. So systemic racism is one of countless variables that contributes to the rising gun violence in Toronto and in other major cities in North America. And the effects of such systemic racism is such that these individuals feel a sense of hopelessness. They can't imagine themselves climbing the socioeconomic ladder that our society is based on in many ways, and they often feel like strangers in their home countries. So the combination of that and the deregulation of brain chemistry and the over reliance on the amygdala that I described before is a recipe for disaster. So Operation Prefrontal Cortex, we focus primarily on the childhood trauma and neglect. However, I was hired to write an article on meditation's effects on racial biases by Big Think, which is one of my favorite science publications. So that should be published in about a couple of weeks. But through the process of writing that article, I interviewed Adam Luke of Ball State University, and his research has shown that meditation actually causes the brain to transcend racial biases. So the process of meditating on a regular basis, ideally a daily basis, can potentially cause individuals to become less racist, which has implications on the young racialized individuals that I spoke about before. Also, police violence is a major problem in Toronto and other major North American cities. Um, Anti-Black racism was declared a public health crisis in Toronto by the Toronto Board of Health last summer. The statistics that they brought forth were such that Black people are far more prone to being arrested, shot, and killed by police, even though Black people account for approximately 9% of Toronto's population. And the reason for that is due to systemic racism, but also the same trauma that many of the young people that I described experience. Police officers have their own trauma, and they're also prone to lashing out. So if you have a police officer who has a overactive amygdala and underactive prefrontal cortex because his or her job is very traumatizing and difficult, then they're prone to lashing out. And if they have racial biases that are unprocessed, they're prone to lashing out at Black people, Indigenous people, etc. And finally, what I'll say is police officers are also a danger to themselves. Police officers have higher rates of suicide than any other profession. So meditation can help to alleviate that. And Operation Prefrontal Cortex focuses on police violence, gun violence, and mass violence. So we're addressing these issues amongst a variety of populations.
Wow, that is so important. So you touched on this slightly earlier, but about your existential crisis in 2014, but what really inspired you to take mental health and really take it into your life as such a key value and a key cornerstone of you and your life?
Right. I first started out my career as a commercial photographer and a photojournalist. I realized early on that those two avenues may not be enough for me to pay the bills and may also lead to limitations in terms of certain goals that I wanted to accomplish. So I developed new skill sets, production, art direction, etc. And I created my own production company. However, I developed a very extreme form of perfectionism, which started in high school. And through my production company, I was managing approximately 40 contractors by myself because I had a maladaptive need for control. I didn't want to partner with someone. I didn't want to let go of control. So managing all those people was incredibly stressful. And also at that early juncture in my career, I didn't really know what I was doing. So I created a lot of self-imposed stress for myself. And I was essentially taking the edge off by partying, going to nightclubs, etc., which are potentially volatile and dangerous environments. And in 2014, the way that my business was structured, the lack of introspection and calm in my life, and the overwhelm that I felt by managing so many people through my production company led to an existential crisis where I was no longer sure about who I was or if my career path was right for me. And I didn't have the means to cope with the anxiety, depression that I was experiencing at the time. So all of that led to me making a full stop, reassessing my life. And that's when I became incredibly interested in psychology to a greater degree than before, introspection. I started studying different forms of yoga. I started studying and practicing different forms of meditation. And that completely changed my life. And I realized that the preeminent problem of our time is a lack of introspection, a lack of self-compassion amongst the greater human population. So that's when I made the decision to become a mental health advocate, to begin working with the most impactful mental health organizations that I could find, and to combine art with mental health advocacy.
Okay, thank you so much. And that's as much as we can answer from today. So we're now going to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentation. And as a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions panel on your attendee control panel. So Ajani, our first question is, do you have any thoughts on the philosophy of nonviolence or how we can promote empathy and kindness in our aggressive society?
Yeah, that's a great question. In the Vedic tradition, which came before the Buddhist tradition, the tenet of nonviolence is called ahimsa, Ahimsa, and it's incredibly hard to adhere to, especially in the society that we live in. The society that we live in is highly competitive, um, which is at a certain level a subtle form of violence. So the loving kindness meditation that we engaged in earlier is a great solution to that. And cultivating loving kindness through that meditation practice is a way of cultivating nonviolence on a daily basis. Also, through some of the practices that I've engaged in over the course of my life, especially over the course of the last 7 years, journaling, hatha yoga, etc. That's also a form of nonviolence, because the more compassionate you are with yourself, the more time you invest in taking care of yourself, the more kindness and compassion you'll be able to extend to others. We treat others in more or less the same way that we treat ourselves. So self-compassion is compassion for others, especially since we're all interrelated.
Yeah, that is so important. So kind of going off that next question about being very in touch and compassionate with yourself, and this one is related to self-actualization. So self-actualization is vital, especially during COVID. What inspires you, and how can audience members find their inspiration?
Right. I believe that a clearly defined life purpose and having meaning in one's life is vital, because especially after high school, life is going to come at you fast, and you're undoubtedly going to be in situations that are scary, traumatizing, and destabilizing to a far greater extent than a high stakes exam or a test. And having meaning in your life, a higher purpose, something that grounds you, something that you can work towards for decades, that will be your guiding star during those tumultuous periods. And it could take an individual 5 years to define their life's purpose in writing. It could take them 10 years. It could take them 20 years. And I'm here to say that it's worth it. Take as much time as needed to define your life purpose. My life purpose is to help young people solve the problems that I faced when I was younger, um, challenges with mental health, and also to help young people self-actualize through their clearly defined life purpose, whether that be creating a startup, solving a major issue like socioeconomic disparities, etc.
Okay, that, yeah, self-actualization is so important, and I think that we all should be on the pursuit of our life purpose because it's just, like you've said, it's so important. And that is all the questions we can answer today. So thank you, Mr. Charles, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, Social Justice, Our History and Future. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view the recording of today's webinar. Please navigate to your links hub on worldaffairs.ucc.on.ca to attend the following events. Immediately following this plenary at 11:15 a.m., the programs team is hosting a startup exhibition on lunch during lunch on Zoom. This is a drop-in style chat in breakout rooms where you have the opportunity to ask professional and student startups questions about their entrepreneurial journey. Please refer to your personal schedule on the WAC website for the list of startups and their corresponding Zoom links. At 11:50 a.m. EST, the WAC 2021 keynote address delivered by renowned poet and professor Dr. George Eliot Clark will take place on GoToWebinar. Please refer to your personal schedule on the WAC website for the webinar link. On behalf of the World Affairs Conference and our presenters, thank you so much for joining us and have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for talking to us today, Ajani, and we are honored to have you here.
Yeah, thank you, Thea. This is a great opportunity, and I'm so grateful to have engaged in this conversation with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and thank you again, Ajani.